Thank you very much. We have to be a little bit stricter on time now because we don't have too much time to kick off one of the interesting debates around climate change and migration. I hope you had all a chance to grab some lunch and are still eager to get some new exciting content now. This next session is called Climate Change and Migration, and we will take half an hour approximately to kick off the debate with a keynote. Aside from the fact that it's probably not exactly very helpful for the political discourse to always cite the huge numbers of people displaced, nevertheless, it's crystal clear that the climate crisis today already is an extremely relevant factor for displacement on the one hand and migration on the other hand. There are twice as many people displaced today by extreme weather events than by war and violence, which is already something that you have to chew on. And if you look at the people that are displaced, from the family who lost their homes and everything they had by river erosion and flooding in Bangladesh and had to go to the slum in Dhaka, to the herders in Ethiopia who basically, to subsequent droughts, lost their cattle, especially their camels, so they had to settle down in IDP camps near the ever more shrinking water sources that are still left, to the people living in small island states that are set to lose not only their home, but literally their country. And these people have at least three things in common, which make them central in that debate. First of all, the climate crisis is directly and already now impacting their mobility, their livelihood, and their chances of survival. The second thing they have in common is they are probably among the ones that are least responsible for the reasons what is happening to them. And the third thing they have in common is they fall in the probably most important humanitarian category. They are the most vulnerable. So we will now have a keynote to discuss some of this and to discuss some of those questions, and I'm extremely happy that Claudia Roth is here. Claudia Roth is the Vice President of German Parliament, Bundestag, since 2013. And basically, since the beginning of her political career, she's very committed to human rights questions, to questions of global justice, for example, also as a chairwoman of the Human Rights Committee in the German Bundestag. Right now, she's doing something really exciting. She explained it to me a couple of times. She's a rapporteur of the IPU, the Interparliamentary Union, which is basically the United Nations of Parliamentarians. And she's a rapporteur on the topic parliamentary strategies to strengthen peace and security against threats and conflicts resulting from climate-related disasters and their consequences. And beyond that, a little bit difficult title are some really amazing and exciting opportunities that she will maybe briefly touch on herself. We have half an hour, and as I said, we have to be very strict because we are especially happy that Claudia is here because she has a very, very busy week, and she also has to run to chair the plenary session in German Bundestag, which is the only acceptable excuse to not attend the Humanitarian Congress. But in this case, we will try to finish right on time, maybe probably 5 minutes earlier, in order for her to make it back to Bundestag. Again, very happy that you're here, and Claudia, have the floor and share your thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm sorry, but I have to run away after my words to you, because it's not only that I have to chair the plenary, but there's also a roll call vote on a tempo limit, speed limit, and if I would not participate, there would be some rumors why not. So. Dear Philipp, Frisch, dear MSF, dear Greenpeace, dear experts, dear guests, dear friends, thank you very much for the invitation to this year's Humanitarian Congress and the opportunity to speak about an important aspect of climate justice, an aspect that, despite its obvious urgency, has been a niche topic for way too long. Displacement and migration in the context of the climate crisis. Indeed, the climate crisis is perhaps the greatest threat to human rights and peace we are facing. every day, millions of people all over the world are witnessing the destruction of their reality. For them already, today, not tomorrow, today, climate crisis means desertification and crop failure, soil salinity and water scarcity, floods and heat waves. At the same time, the climate crisis has been a driver of hunger and poverty. And already today, it is causing the immeasurable loss of homelands, community structures, and cultural heritage, some of it several thousands of years old. According to the Platform on Disaster Displacement, between 2008 and 2017, an estimated 25 to 30 million people were displaced by climate-related events every year. Today, they are more internally displaced people as a result of environmental disasters than of violence and conflict. Still, it is quite hard, if not impossible, to precisely predict how many people will be forced out of their homes in the context of the climate crisis. The IPCC speaks of 280 million people under a 2-degree scenario. The World Bank of 140 million in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and South America alone. In any case, one thing is sure. We should do all we can to gather more data, support research on climate-induced displacement, and thereby close the statistical gap as much as possible, because otherwise just policies will be even more difficult to design. Dear friends, you might have noticed that earlier on, I framed the nexus of climate-induced displacement as being part of the bigger climate justice debate. That was no coincidence. Indeed, while it is industrialized countries, such as Germany, that have contributed to today's global warming far above average, the consequences are being felt and are going to be felt predominantly in the Global South. In the Global South, in turn, it is the most vulnerable groups that suffer the most. Those depending on natural resources, those with the least opportunities to protect themselves or adapt. In other words, women, children, indigenous people, and marginalized groups. As a result, the climate crisis acts as a multiplier of existing injustices, with a tendency to amplify conflicts and to further undermine elementary human rights, such as the right to food, the right to water, to shelter, to education, to health, and the right to a life in dignity. Against this background, bringing together experts and practitioners from various fields, as this Congress does, is a much needed effort in order to join forces and find answers to the multiple and complex humanitarian and human rights challenges triggered or intensified by the climate crisis. And there is good news. We already have very powerful international conventions in place, namely the Paris Climate Agreement and the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development of the United Nations. The bad news is signing agreements doesn't change anything as such. Therefore, we all need to secure implementation in our respective countries on all levels. In other words, we all need to promote fundamental structural transformation in almost all political areas, from our economy to mobility to agriculture, in the way we produce and trade and live our daily lives. If, by contrast, we keep up the status quo, we will walk on a pathway towards at least 3.2 degrees Celsius of global warming, according to the latest scientific research. Even 2 degrees Celsius would be sufficient for whole states such as Tuvalu or Kiribati to disappear due to the rising sea level, not to speak of the many other wide-ranging, irreversible and uncontrollable effects that kick in when tipping points in the global ecosystem should be reached and overshot. The task of limiting global warming to under 2 degrees Celsius is therefore utterly urgent and at the same time challenging. In other words, it has to be our main priority. In this context, work starts at home, as always, but it is also part of our responsibility to support those, mainly in the Global South, whose fundamental rights are being violated as a result of climate change. Still, even if we globally manage to drastically cut our emissions and to multiply adaptation and mitigation measures, people will still be forced to move and leave their homes in order to survive. Thus, we have to find solutions, both in the area of refugee protection and in the field of migration. Political issues which, by the way, are not always easy to tell apart. In general, the displacement nexus in the context of the climate crisis is complicated, intertwined, and challenging. The discussion ranges from Pacific Island states and the potential loss of entire state territories to internally displaced people in countries such as Ethiopia. The phenomena range from sudden onset displacement after natural disasters to slow onset migration, from permanent to temporary displacement, from very local movements to migration across borders. Obviously, there can be no single solution to such a complex issue. And again, there is good news. Numerous international processes already exist. There is the Warsaw Mechanism on Loss and Damage and the Task Force on Displacement, both in the framework of the UNFCCC. There is the Platform on Disaster Displacement, a state-led mechanism based in Geneva, and, of course, there is the UNFCCC itself, bringing together all signatory states once a year at their conferences of the parties. Again, however, there is bad news too. Especially at UNFCCC level, the debate on climate-induced displacement remains cautious, in-group, and very selective. Actually, those states that don't want to get involved still manage to, indeed, not really get involved. If we want to change that, and I think we should, we need to step up our engagement. For instance, we could systematically give climate-induced displacement a fixed and adequate slot on the agenda of each COP meeting, Among others, this would oblige all states to participate in the talks and allow for more coherence among the existing processes. Processes that, please don't get me wrong, should continue to work independently and bottom up. Also, we could establish the position of a United Nations Special Representative or a United Nations Special Advisor on climate-induced displacement, thus strengthening the topic institutionally and moving it closer to the United Nations Secretary General, who spoke about the question of death and life. On a more pragmatic level, we could advance the debate on so-called climate passports that would allow people who have lost or are expected to lose their entire state territory to migrate in a planned, dignified, self-determined, legal, and safe way within the region and the enlarged neighborhood, possibly even towards countries in Europe or North America. At the same time, we definitely have to support individual states that are carefully pushing forward and strengthen existing role model agreements such as the Cartagena Declaration in Latin America or the Kampala Convention adopted by the African Union. We should intensify the urgent debate about the protection of refugees in the context of the climate crisis who, at least in most cases, don't fall under the protection of the Geneva Convention. And we have to discuss money. Indeed, according to most experts, the existing Green Climate Fund, with its $100 billion each year starting in 2020, will not be robust enough to secure all necessary measures of adaptation and mitigation in the Global South. This is even more challenging as the compensation of loss and damage, including possible relocation and resettlement measures in the context of climate-induced migration, is not even part of the fund's scope. To solve that problem, a global polluters fund is being discussed, and experts have come up with a number of innovative financing instruments based on the polluters pay principle. But yes, the overall challenges remain considerable, and the topic is highly complex. It is a huge step forward in this regard that both the Global Compact for Migration and the Global Compact for Refugees, adopted last year, explicitly refer to the complex of climate-related migration and displacement. Both compacts are not of binding nature, so which is one more reason to lobby for their full implementation wherever we get the opportunity. Dear friends, I could have raised many more aspects, from human rights issues to so-called climate court cases, from the importance of ownership to the crucial role of marginalized groups in the fight against the climate crisis, from the connection between climate policy and feminism to proposals by certain experts to expand the European Union's subsidiary protection status. As usual, however, I'm already running late. So let me say three last things to sum it all up. First, we, as international community, still have quite a way to go. Second, time is running. And third, failing is not an option. Thank you.
So you were quick. We have another 4.5 minutes. I'm looking at Anna. She's okay. So I have one question then. I'm just abusing the moderator's privilege to ask it myself. But there's already a common thread, because a lot of people on that stage, they already have called for joint action, for radical collaboration, work together across different sectors, and you also mentioned that in your speech right now. So there's a lot of professionals here, medical professionals, humanitarian professionals, activists from all kinds of different ways and topics. What is your advice in terms of how can we concretely do this collaboration? How can we better work together across the different sectors? And what would be important mistakes to avoid also maybe?
I think it is already very, very important that this Congress is bringing together MSF with Greenpeace. So I think it's high time that we are coming together, that we are fighting together, that we are fighting with the human rights community and the environmental community. So it's high time to bring these different communities or NGOs or, you know what I mean, together. Yeah, because what I saw in Bangladesh, this is, of course, a climate question, that the mangrove parts of Bangladesh are more or less disappearing. It's an ecological question, but it's a human rights question too. It's a political question when I heard that India, having not enough water, is closing the water, is building dams, so that for Ganges, for example, cannot give water to Bangladesh anymore because they need it, and if it's a raining season, they open the dams, and Bangladesh is. So this is a political question, a humanitarian question, a human rights question, an ecological question. Bring it all together. Bring it all together. We have to fight all together. That's the first advice. The second, we have the Sustainable Development Goals. If you would ask in the parliament, in my parliament, who has an idea what it means, the experts would say, oh, it has to do with development policy. Ask the colleagues in the development committee. This is completely wrong. The radical idea, the radical thing with the sustainable development goals is not to ask the least developed countries to start with, but to start here, our way of living, of consuming, of producing, economy, exactly mobility, all these questions, they have to be considered together, and there we have to really start in a radical way, because if you speak with experts, if you see what's going on. Yesterday I met a wonderful woman from Ethiopia, because I was just in the conference of the International Parliamentarian Union where we discussed this topic. It was a young woman from Zimbabwe. She said, future is today. Future is today. In my country, it is today. So don't think it will happen anywhere in another planet or in next 100 years. It started already. And the question of, if you then are together with people in Kiribati is a small island. Oh no, it's a big island, large, and speaking with people, and they have only 1 meter above sea level. And then they tell me, coming from an industrialized country, and they say, we have 0.000 responsibility for what are happening with us. If we disappear, what will happen to us? Where can we go to? What about our state, our nation, our identity? Or if you are in Fiji, it's not a holiday paradise for many. 800 villages had already to move. And you speak with a family that were since generations fishermen, and women also worked with the fish, of course. Fisher families. And they said to me, and now we are forced to become farmers. That's also a loss of identity, and we are responsible. It's a question of responsibility. So let's make the largest coalition possible with churches, with scientists. Make it. It's no time. We have no time. We have no time to lose, and make pressure on the politicians. And yes, also on me, that I don't forget, that I speed up, that I don't come too late.
That's a perfect ending. Thank you very much.